Cora Mallory dropped to her knees on a marble floor she once danced on, scrubbing it with bleeding hands, while the man she loved laughed at her from across the room. Then, something inside her snapped. She stood up, crossed that ballroom like a woman walking through fire, grabbed a stranger by the collar, and kissed him. In front of everyone. If this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe to this channel, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels, and don't you dare leave before the end. The bucket hit the marble floor with a hollow clang that echoed through the empty east corridor of Blackwell Ranch, and Cora Mallory didn't flinch. She had stopped flinching at loud sounds 6 months ago, somewhere around the time she stopped flinching at hunger, at cold, at the particular kind of silence that fills a room when the people inside it have decided you no longer exist. She wrung the mop cloth with both hands. Her knuckles were dry and cracked, the skin splitting along the ridge of her right index finger, where it always split now, no matter how carefully she wrapped it before bed. The water that dripped back into the bucket was gray. She had already done this floor twice. Mrs. Holt, the head housekeeper, would come through at 2:30 and run her finger along the baseboard, and if that finger came up with so much as a shadow of dust, Cora would do it a third time. She didn't argue. She never argued anymore. There had been a time, not so long ago, though it felt like another woman's life entirely, when Cora Mallory had walked through rooms like this one as a guest. When people had stood as she entered. When her father had shaken hands with men like Edmund Blackwell as equals rancher to rancher, the kind of handshake that meant something out here in Wyoming, where a man's land was his name and his name was everything. Her father's name was gone now. The land was gone. And Cora had learned in the hardest possible way that when both of those things disappear, you disappear with them, at least in the eyes of everyone who only ever saw the land and the name to begin with. She dipped the mop back into the bucket. "You missed a spot." Cora didn't look up. She knew the voice. Ruby Fitch, one of the kitchen girls 2 years younger than Cora, with a sharp little mouth and eyes that were always looking for someone lower on the ladder to step on. She had found Cora the moment Cora arrived and had not let go since. "Left of the doorframe," Ruby added. "Right there. You see it." "I see it," Cora said. "Mrs. Holt's going to be through in 20 minutes. "I know when Mrs. Holt comes through." Ruby made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite contempt, something that managed to be both, and her footsteps retreated back toward the kitchen corridor. Cora moved the mop to the left of the doorframe and cleaned the spot she had in fact already cleaned. She did it again anyway. It was easier than the alternative. The alternative was feeling something. She had built a careful system over the past 6 months. A wall, not of stone, but of routine wake before dawn. Light the kitchen fires, carry water from the pump to the upstairs rooms. Scrub the east corridor, polish the silver. On alternating Wednesdays, eat in the servants' hall with her eyes on her plate. Sleep on a cot in the room she shared with 2 other girls who smelled of lye soap and exhaustion. The wall held as long as she stayed inside the routine. The moment she stepped outside it, even for a second, the moment she let herself look at the main staircase, and remember that she had once descended a staircase very much like it in a green silk dress, while her mother watched from below, with proud shining eyes, the wall cracked. So she did not look at the staircase. She looked at the floor. She was very good at floors now. The letter had arrived on a Thursday in early October, the same week the first real cold came down from the mountains. Cora had been standing at the window of the tiny office where Mrs. Holt kept the household accounts when she saw the rider come up the long drive, not one of the Blackwell hands she recognized, but a town rider, the kind who carried official papers. She had watched him without any particular feeling. Official papers were no longer her business. She had no business left. She found out what the letter said only because Ruby told her Ruby, who had a talent for knowing things she had no right to know. "Your friend is getting married," Ruby said over supper that evening with the particular pleasure of someone delivering news they know will wound. "Pierce Vancewood, engaged to Eleanor Hurst. The announcement was in the paper today." Cora had kept her eyes on her plate. "Good for him," she said. "They say it's going to be a grand affair. The Hurst family has 3 ranches, you know, over in—" "I know the Hurst family," Cora said. She had in fact known the Hurst family quite well. Eleanor Hurst had attended the same church as Cora growing up, had sat 2 pews back, had once borrowed Cora's hymnal when she forgot her own. Cora had handed it over with a smile. She had been the kind of girl who smiled easily back then. The kind of girl who thought the world was on the whole a generous place. She ate the rest of her supper without tasting it, washed her dish, and went to bed. She lay on her cot in the dark and listened to the other girls breathe and told herself very firmly that what she felt was nothing. Not grief, not rage, nothing. She almost believed it. Pierce Vancewood had come into her life the summer she was 19, riding onto Mallory land, with a letter of introduction from a mutual acquaintance and a smile that made the world feel warmer. He was handsome in the way that some men are handsome, not dramatically, not in a way that made you immediately mistrust it, but quietly reliably in a way that made you think, yes, this is a man I can trust this face. He had brown eyes, a careful laugh, and manners that her mother had called impeccable. Her mother had liked him. That memory more than anything was the one that still had the power to make Cora's chest ache. Her mother, sitting at the kitchen table of the Mallory ranch house, pouring Pierce Vancewood a second cup of coffee and saying, "Cora, this young man has excellent taste." And her father looking up from his newspaper with a half-hidden smile, and everything in that moment being warm and possible and safe. Everything went wrong the next summer. The drought came first, slow and merciless. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but simply withdraws quietly, removing rain and river water in grace, until you look up one day and realize the land you have been working all your life has turned to powder in your hands. The cattle died. The crops failed. Her father borrowed money from the bank first, then from private lenders, then from men whose names her mother lowered her voice to say. Her mother got sick that winter, nothing dramatic, just a persistent cough that deepened into something worse, and then worse than that, until one February morning, she simply wasn't there anymore. Her father followed 4 months later. The doctor called it heart failure. Cora knew better. She had watched him fail, not his heart, but everything around it. His land, his name, his wife, his ability to believe that effort would be rewarded. A man like her father was not built to survive the discovery that the world was indifferent to hard work and decency. When he understood that, he simply stopped. Pierce came to the funeral. He held her hand at the graveside. He told her he was sorry. He said all the right things in all the right order, and Cora had leaned against him and thought, at least I still have this. At least there is still this one thing. He came back 3 more times that spring, each visit shorter than the last, each leave-taking a little more careful, a little more polite, in a way that felt like distance. In May, he told her kindly, gently, in the tone a person uses when they have rehearsed a thing so many times, it no longer sounds rehearsed, that he thought they ought to give each other some space, that she had a great deal to manage, that he didn't want to be a burden to her during such a difficult time. Cora had stood at the door of what was no longer her ranch house. The bank had already sent the first notice, and she had known even then that the second was coming, and watched him ride away and thought, oh, so that's what nothing feels like. She found the position at Blackwell Ranch through a woman at church who cleaned for the Blackwells twice a week and mentioned that they needed a second housemaid. Cora had taken a full day to decide. Not because she was proud she had stopped being proud sometime around the 4th month after her parents died, when pride had begun to feel like an unaffordable luxury, but because there was something almost unbearably precise about the cruelty of it. The Blackwells were the largest ranching family in 3 counties. Everyone knew the Blackwells. Everyone knew Blackwell Ranch. And everyone, therefore, would know that Cora Mallory, whose father had once shaken hands with Edmund Blackwell as an equal, was now scrubbing the man's floors. But hunger is a more honest teacher than dignity, and in the end she took the position. She had been here 6 months now. She had scrubbed every floor. She had polished every piece of silver. She had learned which stairs creaked and which corridor drafts to avoid, and which of the ranch hands left their boots outside in a way that made extra mud, and which left them inside in a way that made less. She had become in the way that invisible people become extremely observant. She had also, in that same time, become almost entirely numb. Almost. It was Mrs. Holt who told her about the ball. "The family is entertaining Saturday evening," Mrs. Holt said, consulting her ledger with the expression of a general planning a campaign. "It's a significant affair. The Blackwells are hosting half of Cheyenne near enough. I need you on serving for the evening. You'll wear the gray dress, keep your hair back, and you will not speak to any guests unless spoken to first. If a guest asks for something, you fetch it. If a guest spills something, you clean it. If a guest looks at you as if you don't exist, you take it as a compliment. Are we understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Cora said. "You have a particular quality," Mrs. Holt added in what was perhaps the strangest compliment anyone had ever paid her, of being easy not to notice. "I want you to lean into that on Saturday." Cora had leaned into it for 6 months. She suspected she could manage one more evening. She was wrong. Saturday arrived cold and bright, the kind of Wyoming autumn evening that comes in clean and honest, and makes you feel for one brief stupid moment that everything might be all right after all. The ranch house blazed with light. She could hear the music from the servants' corridor, a fiddle and a piano, and something that might have been a brass instrument, all blending together into the kind of sound that reaches into your chest and reminds you of things you have tried to forget. She carried trays. She refilled glasses. She moved through the crowded ballroom like a ghost, which was exactly what Mrs. Holt had asked her to be. And she kept her eyes low and her expression pleasant and empty, and she thought about the floor she would scrub tomorrow and the water she would carry the day after, and she did not let herself feel anything. And then she heard his laugh. She would have known that laugh in a crowd of 1,000. It was a particular laugh, not cruel, not loud, but with a quality she had never quite been able to name until this moment, standing in a ballroom with a tray of champagne glasses, hearing it across the room. Self-satisfaction. That was the quality. It was the laugh of a man who had arranged the world to his liking and found the arrangement entirely acceptable. She looked up. Pierce Vancewood stood 15 feet away near the fireplace with a glass of bourbon in his hand and Eleanor Hurst on his arm. Eleanor was wearing blue, a deep expensive blue that brought out something in her coloring. She looked lovely. She looked, Cora thought, with a detachment that surprised her, genuinely lovely. Not a bad woman. Probably never a bad woman. Just the woman who had what Cora no longer had, which was money and land, and therefore the possibility of Pierce Vancewood's continued devotion. Cora turned away. She was halfway to the servants' door when she heard Eleanor say something she couldn't make out the words over the music, and Pierce laugh again. And then Pierce's voice raised just slightly, carrying in the way that voices do when a person isn't entirely trying to keep them from carrying. "Oh, that? Don't mind her. She used to be somebody. Ranch family over in..." A pause, a dismissive gesture she could sense without seeing. "Doesn't matter. Nothing left of it now. She works here." The music played on. The conversation around her continued. And Cora stood very still in the middle of the Blackwell ballroom with her tray of champagne glasses and felt the wall she had spent 6 months building simply dissolve. She heard Eleanor say quietly, "Pierce, that's unkind." She heard Pierce say easily pleasantly, as if remarking on the weather, "It isn't unkind if it's true. She's nothing, Ellie. She's been nothing for a year. It's a shame, but there it is." Nothing. The word landed somewhere behind her sternum and detonated. She was not sure afterward what she had intended. She would think about it many times in the weeks that followed, in the cold corridor at dawn, in the steam of the laundry room in the few minutes before sleep, and she would never arrive at a satisfying answer. Perhaps she had intended to confront him. Perhaps she had intended to say something. Something sharp, something final, something that would peel the pleasant expression off his face and let him see exactly what his easy dismissal had cost her. Perhaps she had intended nothing at all, and simply moved on. Instinct, the way a person who has been burning for a long time eventually stops trying to put the fire out. What she actually did was this. She set her tray down on the nearest flat surface. She turned around, and she walked across the ballroom. People moved for her, not because they knew who she was, but because something in the way she was walking made them step aside. She did not look at Pierce. She looked past him, and in looking past him, she saw for the first time that evening, though she had been in the room for 2 hours, Jasper Blackwell. He was standing near the far window, somewhat apart from the nearest cluster of guests, with a glass he didn't appear to be drinking from, and an expression that could most charitably be described as tolerating the proceedings. He was taller than she had realized from a distance, broad through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been cut from something harder than bone, and dark eyes that were at this particular moment watching her cross the room with an expression she could not read. She didn't try to read it. She walked straight to him, took his face in both her hands, and kissed him. The fiddle stopped. She didn't hear it stop. She felt it the way you feel a sound ending more than you hear it. The whole room didn't go silent at once. It went quiet, in a wave, person by person, conversation by conversation, until the only sound was the fire and the faint creak of the floorboards under her feet. Jasper Blackwell did not move. He did not pull back. He did not push her away. He stood absolutely still under her hands, and for one long, suspended moment, she kissed the most powerful man in 3 counties in front of every important person in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and the world held its breath. Then she let go. She turned around. The room was watching her. Pierce was watching her. His bourbon glass halted halfway to his mouth, his pleasant expression entirely and satisfyingly gone. Cora took a breath. "I apologize for the interruption," she said to the room in general, in a voice she did not entirely recognize as her own, clear and steady, and carrying in a way she had not known she was still capable of. "I simply wanted to greet my betrothed." Nobody spoke. Pierce's mouth opened. Eleanor's hand tightened on his arm. Cora met Pierce's eyes across 15 feet of ballroom floor and held them for exactly as long as she needed to. Long enough for him to understand that she had heard him long enough for the word, nothing to hang in the air between them like smoke. And then she looked away, because he was not worth looking at anymore. She became aware in the silence that followed that Jasper Blackwell was standing directly behind her. She could feel the warmth of him. He was closer than she expected, which meant he had moved, which meant he had made a choice. He settled one hand at the small of her back. It was a light touch, barely there, but the room saw it. "I believe the next dance is being called," he said into the silence, in a voice as level and unhurried as a man remarking on the time. "If you'll excuse us." The music started again. Conversation resumed in a rush, the way water fills a space that has suddenly been opened. And Cora Mallory, who had come into this ballroom as a servant carrying a tray of champagne glasses, walked onto the dance floor on the arm of Jasper Blackwell, and tried very hard not to think about what she had just done to her life. She didn't succeed. "You want to tell me?" Jasper said quietly as they moved through the opening steps of the dance. He knew how to dance. She registered distantly, knew how to lead without forcing, which surprised her. What that was about. "I would prefer not to." "I imagine you would." He guided her through a turn. The man by the fireplace. The one with the bourbon and the very unfortunate expression. "We were acquainted." "Clearly." Another pause. "He said something that upset you." It wasn't a question. Cora didn't answer it. "The word betrothed," Jasper said, still in that same quiet, even tone, "has specific implications in this county. You understand that." "I understand that." "And you said it anyway." "I said it anyway." He was quiet for a moment. Around them, other couples moved through the dance, casting glances in their direction, some curious, some calculating, some carrying the particular bright-eyed quality of people who have just witnessed something they cannot wait to tell someone else about. "That man," Jasper said finally, "called you nothing." Cora missed a step. She recovered it quickly, but he had felt it, she could tell by the slight adjustment of his hand at her waist, steadying without drawing attention. "You heard that," she said. "I hear most things that happen in my house." He looked at her directly then, for the first time since they'd stepped onto the floor. His eyes were darker up close and more watchful than she expected. Not cold exactly. Watchful. Like a man who has learned that most things in the world require careful observation before they reveal what they actually are. "You're one of Mrs. Holt's girls." It wasn't said unkindly. It was said the way a man states a fact when he is establishing his understanding of the situation. "Yes," Cora said. "Mallory." he said. "Cora Mallory. Your father was Thomas Mallory. The Double M Ranch over on the eastern fork of the Laramie." She looked at him. "You knew my father." "I knew of him. He was a good rancher." Something moved briefly in his expression and was gone. "I'm sorry for what happened to his family." Cora said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. The dance was ending. Around them, couples were separating, stepping back, beginning the rituals of regrouping and conversation that followed. In a moment, they would separate too, and she would walk back to the servants' corridor, and Mrs. Holt would be waiting, and the rest of the evening would require getting through somehow. "Miss Mallory," Jasper said, as the last notes of the music settled. She stopped. "The word betrothed," he said, "has specific implications. As I mentioned." He held her gaze. "I intend to discuss those implications with you. Tomorrow morning. Before breakfast." She stared at him. "You're not angry," she said before she could stop herself. "Should I be—" "I kissed you in front of half of Cheyenne without your permission." "You did." He released her hand. "And we'll discuss that tomorrow." He took one step back, the distance returning between them correct and measured. "Get some rest, Miss Mallory. You look like a woman who hasn't slept in 6 months." He turned and walked back toward the far side of the room, and Cora stood at the edge of the dance floor and watched him go, and thought with a clarity that cut through the shock and the panic and the bone-deep exhaustion that she had just made either the worst or the best decision of her entire life. She did not yet know which. She went back to the servants' corridor. She carried the remaining trays. She washed the glasses and set them in their racks and wiped down the kitchen counters and said goodnight to the other girls and lay down on her cot in the dark. She did not sleep. She thought about her father's hands. Big, calloused, capable hands, and the way he used to grip the fence post when he walked the property line, checking each post the way a man checks something he is proud of, something he has built. She thought about her mother's voice calling her in from the yard on summer evenings, the particular note it took on just before dark, warm and certain. She thought about Pierce Vancewood's face at the graveside, and Pierce Vancewood's voice in the ballroom, and the 6 months between those two moments that had turned him from the man she thought she knew into the man she now understood he had always been. And she thought about Jasper Blackwell's hand at her back. The lightness of it. The choice of it. Before breakfast, he'd said. She lay in the dark and listened to Wyoming breathing around her, the wind off the mountains, the creak of the house, the distant sound of cattle shifting in their sleep, and she thought, all right then. She would see what came next. She had nothing left to lose. Or rather, and this was the thing she turned over in her mind in those last moments, before exhaustion finally pulled her under. She had spent the last year believing she had nothing left to lose, and she had been wrong about that too. Because a woman with nothing left to lose does not feel the particular burning thing she had felt when Pierce Vancewood called her nothing in a room full of people who used to call her Miss Mallory. A woman with nothing left to lose does not cross a ballroom like the floor is on fire. A woman with nothing left to lose does not reach out and grab the future with both hands and hold on. She didn't know yet what she had started. She didn't know what Jasper Blackwell intended to say to her in the morning, or what the county would make of what they'd witnessed, or what Pierce Vancewood would do with the humiliation she'd handed him. She didn't know any of it, but for the first time in 6 months lying on her narrow cot in the dark of the servants' room at Blackwell Ranch, Cora Mallory felt something other than numb. She felt awake. She didn't sleep more than 2 hours. She knew at the moment she opened her eyes that particular exhaustion that sits behind the eyes and makes the world feel slightly too bright, too loud, too real. The other girls were still breathing in the slow rhythm of sleep. Cora dressed in the dark as she always did, moving by feel and habit, buttoning her dress by memory. She splashed cold water on her face from the basin, pressed her wet hands against her cheeks, and held them there for a moment. Before breakfast, he'd said. Her hands were trembling. Not much, just enough that she noticed. She had done something last night that could not be undone. She had understood that even in the moment standing at the edge of the dance floor, with the music fading and half of Cheyenne watching, she had understood that what she'd set into motion had weight, had consequence, had a shape she couldn't yet see the full edges of. But understanding a thing and feeling its full mass are two different experiences, and this morning in the cold pre-dawn of the servants' quarters, the full mass of it had arrived. She had kissed Jasper Blackwell in front of everyone. She had called him her betrothed, and he had not denied it. She went down to the kitchen and lit the fires because it was what she did every morning, and routine was the only thing she trusted right now. She put the kettle on. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky go from black to the particular deep blue that comes just before dawn in Wyoming, the color her mother used to say of a held breath. "You're up early." She turned. Jasper Blackwell was standing in the kitchen doorway in his work clothes, not the clothes he'd worn last night, not the formal jacket and pressed shirt, but the clothes of a man who ran a ranch. Worn canvas trousers, a flannel shirt with the sleeves already rolled boots that had seen 10 years of hard use. He looked like a different man. He looked, she thought, more like himself, though she had no basis for that thought. "I always light the fires," she said. "I know." He came into the kitchen, pulled out a chair from the rough table in the center of the room. Not the dining room table, not the formal table, the kitchen table, the workers' table, and sat down. "Sit down, Miss Mallory." She sat. The kettle hadn't boiled yet. The fire she'd just lit was still finding itself. They were alone in the kitchen, and the house was quiet around them, and this she realized was the most vulnerable position she had been in since the night her father died. Jasper folded his hands on the table. He didn't look at her with anger. He didn't look at her with amusement, which would have been worse. He looked at her the same way he'd looked at her last night, watchful, measuring like a man taking the full inventory of a situation before deciding what it requires. "Tell me about him," he said. She blinked. "I beg your pardon." "The man by the fireplace. Vancewood." He said the name flatly without inflection. "Tell me about him." "That isn't necessary." "I think it is." He leaned back in his chair. "You kissed me in front of every important person in 3 counties. Miss Mallory, you called me your betrothed. You made a declaration that half the county is already spreading by way of breakfast table conversation this morning. That makes your business my business, whether you like it or not, so tell me about him." So, the kettle began to rattle. She got up, poured the water, brought 2 cups to the table because her hands needed something to do. She set one in front of him and wrapped both hands around her own. We were... She stopped, started again. "We were going to be married, before the drought, before my parents died. After that She looked down at her cup. "He decided he had other priorities. He left you." He was very polite about it. "The polite ones," Jasper said, "are always the worst kind." Something about the directness of that made her throat tight. She nodded once, very small. "And last night he called you nothing." "He didn't think I could hear him." "But you did." "I did." She lifted her cup, held it. "And She set it back down. "I don't have a good explanation for what I did after that. I know I created a problem. I know I put you in a position without your consent. And I know that what I said..." "Stop apologizing," he said. She looked up. "I'm not looking for an apology. I'm looking for an understanding." He was watching her steadily. "You said a word that creates expectations in this county, between 2 families. I need to know if you understood that when you said it, or if you said it entirely on impulse." "Entirely on impulse," she said without hesitation. He was quiet for a moment. Then, to her complete surprise, the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more the ghost of one. The suggestion that somewhere behind that controlled expression there was something that found the world occasionally interesting. "At least you're honest," he said. "I've found dishonesty requires more energy than I currently have." This time, the ghost of a smile became slightly more substantial. It was gone almost immediately. "Here is the position we are in," he said. "By this evening, every family in the county will know what was said in this ballroom last night. By tomorrow, the story will have traveled to Cheyenne proper. By the end of the week, it will have reached my father's business associates in Denver." He paused. My father is in poor health, Miss Mallory. He has been asking me with increasing urgency to marry and produce an heir. Several families have been maneuvering in recent months to place their daughters in this position. I have been equally maneuvering to avoid it. Last night's announcement, whatever its origins, has clarified things. Cora stared at him. You're saying this helps you? I'm saying this could be managed in a way that doesn't destroy us both. He looked at her directly. Or it could be managed badly and destroy us both. The difference is what we decide to do in the next 72 hours. What are you proposing? I'm proposing, he said carefully, that we let the county believe what they believe. For a time, long enough for the immediate pressure on both sides to ease. He set his hands flat on the table. In return, I will not reduce your position here. You will not lose your place, and you will be treated while this arrangement holds as a guest of this house rather than a servant. The fire was catching now. She could hear it the shift from tentative flame to committed burn. You're asking me to lie, she said. I'm asking you to let a lie that's already been told stand until we can find a graceful way to correct it. He held her gaze. That's a different thing. Is it? Ask me again in 6 months. She thought about the servants' corridor, the bucket, the mop, the marble floor she had scrubbed 3 times yesterday. She thought about Ruby's voice, she used to be somebody, and Pierce's laugh, and the word nothing hanging in the air of the ballroom like smoke. She thought about her father's hands on the fence posts. What do you get out of this? She asked. Honestly. Breathing room, he said simply. My father stopped sending me letters about the Hargrove girl. The county stops watching to see who'll be the next Mrs. Blackwell. I get 6 months to run my ranch without that particular circus as background noise. He paused. And you get... He looked around the kitchen, the fire, the worn table, the stone floor. You get out of this room. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in 6 months. She held it for a moment, waited. There are conditions, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Interest, possibly. The look of a man who has expected compliance and received negotiation instead. Say them, he said. I am not going to be managed, she said. I'm not going to be moved from one kind of invisible to another kind. If I'm to be treated as a guest of this house, I expect to be treated as a person with her own mind, not a decoration, not a convenience. Agreed. I want to understand the ranch, the actual operations. I grew up on a working ranch and I'm not stupid about land and cattle, and I won't be kept away from that knowledge as if I'm made of glass. She met his eyes. My father ran 2,000 acres. I know what good land management looks like. I want to learn how this ranch works. He studied her for a long moment. She didn't look away. That, he said slowly, is not a condition I expected. I'm not the woman you expected. Another ghost of that almost smile. No, he agreed. You're not. He was quiet for a beat. Agreed. You'll start with the weekly account meetings. Thursday mornings. Be there or don't, but if you're there, I'll expect you to pay attention and ask real questions, not polite ones. I don't know how to ask polite questions, she said. Good. They looked at each other across the kitchen table in the early light, with the fire crackling and the house still quiet around them, and something settled between them, not warmth, not yet, but something solid. An agreement. A foundation. The kind of thing you could build on if you were careful and honest about what you were building. There is one more thing, Jasper said. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a ring, simple gold with a small stone that caught the firelight, and set it on the table between them. Appearances, he said. People will expect to see it. Cora looked at the ring. Then she picked it up and put it on. It fit. That surprised her. She didn't say so. All right, she said. What happens now? Now, he said, you move into the east guest room. You eat at the family table, and you come to breakfast in 20 minutes because the ranch hands eat at 6:30, and I like to have spoken to my foreman before that. He stood, pushed his chair back. And Miss Mallory? She looked up. The man last night, Vance Wood. He said it without particular emphasis, but something in his tone had changed. It was harder at the edge, the way good iron is hard. He won't call you nothing again. I can promise you that. He left the kitchen before she could respond, and Cora sat alone at the table with a ring on her finger, and a fire building behind her, and something unfamiliar moving around in her chest that it took her a moment to identify. It was not happiness. It was too complicated for happiness. It was the feeling of a door opening. The East guest room was 3 times the size of the room she'd shared with 2 other girls. It had a window that faced the mountains, and a proper bed with 4 posts, and a wardrobe with actual space to hang things in. Cora stood in the middle of it for approximately 30 seconds, taking a full inventory of how different it was from where she had been sleeping. And then she put her one good dress in the wardrobe and went down to breakfast. The cook, a wide woman named May, who had been feeding the Blackwell household for 14 years and had opinions about everything expressed with the confidence of a woman who knew she could not be fired, gave Cora a look when she appeared at the dining room door that contained several full paragraphs of unspoken commentary. "Mr. Blackwell said to set a place," May said. "He did." Cora agreed. May set the place. Jasper's foreman, a weathered man named Cal, who was somewhere between 50 and ancient and had a handshake like a closed fist, arrived at the table at the same moment as Cora and took in the situation with the expression of a man who has seen many things and is prepared to see several more. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Good morning," Cora said. She sat down. She ate. She listened to Cal and Jasper talk about the south pasture fencing and the condition of the creek and which of the cattle were ready for market and which needed another season. She did not pretend not to be listening. She asked at one point, careful specific about the creek flooding pattern and how it had affected the east pasture yield. Both men looked at her. "My father had a similar problem on the eastern fork," she said without apology. "He solved it by redirecting the secondary channel. It took 2 seasons to see the full effect, but the yield improved by about 30% in the 3rd year." Cal looked at Jasper. Jasper looked at Cora. "The Eastern Fork property," he said. "The double M." "Yes." He looked back at Cal. "What's our current Eastern pasture situation?" And just like that they were talking again, and Cora was part of the conversation, and something that had been clenched in her chest for 6 months. Something she hadn't even fully recognized as clenched, until this moment, let go just slightly. Ruby found her in the corridor outside the dining room an hour later. "I heard," Ruby said. Her voice was strange, not the mean bright quality it usually carried, but something flatter, harder to read. "Did you?" Cora said. Everyone heard. Ruby looked at her at the ring specifically, her eyes dropping to it, and then coming back up. "Last night. What you did." "Yes." "And now, you're what living upstairs." The flatness cracked, and underneath it was something that might have been anger, and might have been, Cora thought, something closer to a terrible understanding. Just like that, one night. Cora looked at her steadily. "Ruby, what do you want to say to me?" Ruby's jaw tightened. "I want to say it isn't fair." "No," Cora agreed. "It isn't." The agreement seemed to knock the wind out of whatever Ruby had been building toward. She stood in the corridor and looked at Cora, and whatever she'd intended to say next didn't come. "I didn't plan this," Cora said quietly. "I want you to know that. I wasn't maneuvering. I didn't come here with a strategy. I came here because I had nothing left and I needed work." She paused. "Last night I made an impulsive decision that I'm not entirely sure was a good one. It might still go badly. I might be back in the servants' hall by the end of the month." "You won't," Ruby said. The flatness was back, but it was different now, less like anger, more like the tone of someone stating something they find deeply unfair and are choosing not to fight. "You won't because you know how to talk to them. The Blackwells. Men like that." She looked at Cora with the clear-eyed appraisal of someone who has been watching the world's unfairness for a long time and has catalogued it with precision. "You were one of them once. You know the words." Cora didn't have an answer for that wasn't hollow. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. Ruby didn't respond. She turned and went back down the corridor toward the kitchen, and Cora watched her go, and felt the weight of what Ruby had just said settle over her like something she would have to carry. She had known the words. That was the truth. She had sat down at that breakfast table and asked the right question in the right way, because she had grown up at tables where those questions were asked, and that knowledge, the knowledge of how to occupy a room, how to speak in a way that gets heard, was something she had taken entirely for granted until she lost everything else, and it turned out to be one of the few things poverty couldn't strip from her. That was not fair. She sat with that for a moment in the empty corridor and let it be true without flinching from it. Then she went upstairs to her new room and stood at the window that faced the mountains and watched the ranch move below her. The hands crossing the yard, the horses at the fence, the whole busy apparatus of a working property, going about its morning. And she thought about her father and what he had built, and what it had taken, and what it had taken from him when it was gone. And she made herself a promise, quiet and private, the kind you make in the early morning, with no one watching. She would not waste this. Whatever this was, whatever strange, constructed, mutually convenient thing she had stumbled into, she would not waste it. She would learn everything. She would become someone who deserved to be at that table, not just someone who knew the words. She would earn the floor she stood on, one way or another. Below her, Jasper crossed the yard toward the barn, and one of the ranch hands said something to him, and he stopped and listened with his whole attention in the way that some men have. The way that makes you feel even from a distance that the thing you're saying is the only thing in the world at that moment. She had noticed it at breakfast, too. He didn't perform interest. He simply was interested, or he wasn't, and when he was, you knew it. She had spent a year being invisible to people who performed interest. She turned away from the window. Thursday morning arrived and she was in the account room at the time Jasper had specified. He was already there, seated behind a desk that was covered in a disciplined organization of ledgers and correspondence, and across from him was his ranch manager, a precise man named Aldous Briggs, who wore small spectacles and had clearly not been informed that Cora would be joining them. Aldous looked at her over his spectacles. Jasper said, "Miss Mallory is sitting in on account meetings going forward." Aldous opened his mouth. "She has a background in ranch management," Jasper added in a tone that closed the subject with the same efficiency that a good fence closes a field. "She may have useful observations." Aldous closed his mouth. He looked at Cora with the expression of a man who has objections and has been informed that they are not relevant. Cora sat down and folded her hands in her lap and said nothing. The meeting lasted 2 hours. She did not speak for the first 40 minutes. She listened to the numbers, the cost of winter, feed, the projected market price for spring cattle, the outstanding debt on the north fence line, the question of whether to expand the breeding stock or consolidate. She listened, and she built the picture in her mind, the full picture, the way her father had taught her, the way you don't look at any one number, but at all of them together, the shape they make when you step back. At the 50-minute mark, Aldous said something about the North Pasture lease renewal, a leasing arrangement with a neighboring family, the Darbys, that had been in place for 11 years, and she felt something catch in her memory. "The Darby lease," she said. Both men looked at her. "I'm sorry to interrupt. The Darby lease, do the terms include water rights on the Northern Creek branch?" Aldous blinked. "They do." "And the Darbys have renewed at the same rate for 11 years. "They have." Did anyone account for the fact that the Northern Creek branch changed course approximately 4 years ago after the flood? If the creek moved, the water rights location in the lease may no longer correspond to the actual water source, which means... She stopped. Both men were looking at her with different expressions than they'd had 60 seconds ago. "Which means," Jasper said slowly, "the Darbys may be drawing water from a source that isn't covered by their current lease agreement." "It would need to be verified against the original survey," Cora said. "But yes, that's what it means." The silence in the room was the kind that follows the discovery of something that has been sitting overlooked for 4 years and has accumulated consequence in the waiting. Jasper looked at Aldous. "Pull the original survey." Aldous pulled his spectacles off, polished them, replaced them, and looked at Cora with an expression that had moved in the space of 4 minutes from dismissal to something substantially more complicated. "Where did you learn to read lease agreements?" he asked. "My father," she said. He had a theory that the most expensive mistakes on a ranch were always made by the person who thought the details were someone else's job. Aldous nodded very slowly, as if recalibrating something internal. He made a note. He pulled out another ledger. They worked for another full hour, and Cora spoke 4 more times, and 3 of those 4 times resulted in Aldous writing something down. When the meeting ended and Aldous had collected his ledgers and left, Jasper remained at his desk and looked at her without speaking for a moment. "Your father taught you well," he said. "He didn't have a son," she said. "So he taught me. He was a wise man." The word was hit her the same way it always did, quieter than she expected, more precise. She nodded once. "The Darby lease issue," Jasper said. "If it holds up under the survey, that's a significant finding. It's worth real money in renegotiation or in legal standing." "I know. Aldous has been managing these accounts for 8 years. I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "You're not comfortable being the person who noticed something he missed." It wasn't quite a question. She thought about lying about demurring, making it smaller, softening it the way women were expected to soften inconvenient intelligence. She didn't. "I'm comfortable with it," she said. "I'm not sure Aldous is." A sound came from Jasper that she had not heard from him before, brief, genuine, the sound of a man actually amused. It was different from his near smiles. It was real. "No," he agreed. "He isn't." He stood, began gathering papers. "He'll manage. Aldous is a practical man. Practical men adjust." She was almost at the door when he spoke again. "Miss Mallory." She stopped. "Pierce Vancewood will be in Cheyenne this week," he said in the same even tone he used for everything. "He's attending a land auction at the county offices. He will hear, if he hasn't already, about the current situation." She turned slowly. And he will have a response to it," Jasper said. "Men like Vancewood always have a response to being outplayed. I want you to be prepared for that." She held his gaze. "What kind of response?" "I don't know yet." He held her gaze a beat longer than necessary. "But I intend to find out before he has the chance to act on it." She walked out of the account room and into the corridor and stood there for a moment, pressing her back against the wall, and let the full shape of the thing she was living inside settle around her. She had kissed a stranger 4 days ago. She was wearing his ring. She was eating at his table. She had just spent 2 hours helping manage his ranch accounts. And somewhere in Cheyenne, Pierce Vancewood, who had called her nothing in a room full of people, was preparing a response. She thought about what kind of woman she wanted to be when that response arrived. She thought about her father's hands on the fence posts, about her mother's voice in the summer dark, about 6 months on her knees with a mop on a marble floor, and the particular quality of the nothing she had survived. She straightened up. She went upstairs. She put on the ring she had taken off for the account meeting. She wasn't sure why she'd done that, some residual habit of smallness perhaps, and she looked at her reflection in the wardrobe mirror, really looked for the first time in longer than she could remember. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been through something, but she also looked, she thought for the first time in a year, like a woman who was still standing. She went back downstairs and asked May where the ranch hand schedule was kept, and May told her, and she spent the afternoon learning it by heart. When Pierce Vancewood came, she was going to be ready. Pierce Vancewood came on a Wednesday. Cora knew before she saw him. She knew the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes something in the air, a pressure shift, a quality of stillness that isn't peaceful but held. Cal came in from the yard at mid-morning with his hat in his hands, and a look on his face that she had learned in the past week meant he had something to say that he wasn't sure was his business to say. "Rider coming up the main drive," he told Jasper, who was at the account desk. "Vancewood. And he brought company." Jasper didn't look up from the ledger. "How many?" "2 men with him. I don't know the faces." Jasper set his pen down. He looked at Cora, who was seated across the room with the ranch hand schedule she'd been cross-referencing against the winter feed projections. She met his eyes. "You don't have to be in this room," he said. "I know," she said. She didn't move. Something passed across his face, not quite approval, but in the neighborhood of it. He stood. "Cal, have May put coffee on. Show them to the front sitting room. Tell them I'll be 5 minutes." Cal nodded and left. Jasper looked at Cora one more time. "Stay or go," he said. "Your choice, but decide now." "I'll stay," she said. "But not in this room. I want to come in after." He understood immediately she could see it. Not hiding. Entering on her own terms at a moment of her own choosing. He nodded once. "Give it 10 minutes, then come to the sitting room." He straightened his jacket and walked out. Cora sat alone in the account room and looked at the schedule in her hands and counted her own heartbeats until she trusted them to stay even. She gave it 8 minutes, then she went. She heard Pierce's voice before she reached the sitting room door. That careful, measured tone she knew as well as she knew her own name, the one he used when he was being deliberately reasonable, which was always the most dangerous version of him. "Appreciate you seeing us, Blackwell. I want to be straightforward with you man to man. What happened at your ball last Saturday was irregular. I think we both know that." She pushed the door open and walked in. The room went still. Pierce stood near the window with two men she didn't recognize flanking him at a distance that was not quite threatening, but was not casual either. Jasper stood between them and the fireplace, and he was doing the thing she had noticed he did when he was most controlled, standing perfectly still. No unnecessary movement, the stillness of a man who knows his own weight. Pierce saw her. His face did something complicated, surprise quickly managed, then a reconstruction of pleasantness over something harder. "Cora," he said. He said it like they were old friends running into each other at church. "Pierce," she said. She said it like he was a stranger whose name she happened to know. She crossed the room and stood beside Jasper, not behind him, beside him close enough that the proximity said what it needed to say without requiring words. "I was just explaining to Mr. Blackwell," Pierce said, recovering his footing with the ease of long practice, "that the announcement made at the ball has caused some confusion. Naturally, people are asking questions." He smiled. It was an excellent smile. She had once thought it was the most honest thing about him. Now she could see the machinery behind it. "I thought it was worth having a direct conversation given our history." "Our history," Cora said. "Yes. You mean the part where you told a room full of people I was nothing." The smile didn't waver. It was very good. "Cora, I think you may have misheard. I didn't mishear." She kept her voice the same temperature. Jasper kept his level unhurried. "You said it clearly. I was standing 15 feet away." Feelings were running high that evening. "I apologize if something I said was taken." "Pierce?" She said his name differently this time, flatter, more final. "What is it you actually came here to say?" The smile thinned. This was the thing about Pierce. He could manage pleasantness for a long time. But when you stopped responding to it, when you simply declined to play the game of pretending the pleasantness was real, he ran out of room. He looked at Jasper. The engagement announcement was impulsive and informal. "The county is talking. The Hearst family specifically has concerns about what this implies about the timing." "The Hearst family," Jasper said, speaking for the first time since Cora had entered the room, "can bring their concerns directly to me. That's the correct channel." His voice was the same as always, steady, no edge that you could easily name, but something that made the air in the room feel slightly denser. "Not through you." Pierce's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to handle this quietly." "Why?" Cora said. Pierce looked at her sharply. "Why quietly?" she continued. "If you have concerns, state them. If the Hearst family has concerns, let them state them. Why does this need to be handled quietly, and by you specifically?" She tilted her head slightly. "What is it you're actually trying to protect, Pierce?" The room held its breath. One of the men flanking Pierce shifted his weight. It was a small movement, but it caught Cora's attention the way small movements always do when they're unexpected, and something in her chest contracted. Pierce said quietly, with the pleasantness entirely gone now. You are making a mistake, Cora. You have put yourself in a position you don't understand. This man, he gestured at Jasper without looking at him, which was either courage or foolishness, has obligations and entanglements you are not aware of. I am trying to protect you from. Stop. Her voice came out harder than she intended. Good. Stop telling me what you're trying to protect me from. You lost that right on a May afternoon when you rode away from a house I was about to lose and told me you needed space. Pierce's mouth closed. You don't get to protect me now, she said. You don't get to be concerned about my position, or my choices, or my understanding of what I've gotten into. You gave that up. You made that choice. She looked at him, really looked the way she hadn't allowed herself to since the ballroom, because looking meant feeling, and she hadn't been ready, and she found to her own quiet astonishment that what she felt was not grief. Not anymore. I'm not angry with you, she said, and meant it. But I am done with you. Those are different things. Pierce stood very still for a moment. Then he looked at Jasper, and something passed between the two men that Cora recognized as the particular communication that happens between men who are deciding whether a situation has escalated past the point of words. Jasper said, I think you've said what you came to say. It was the most polite version of leave possible. Pierce took one breath. Then he put his hat back on and turned and walked out. His two men followed. The front door of Blackwell Ranch opened and closed, and the sound of hoofbeats retreated down the drive, and Cora stood in the sitting room and felt her legs for the first time remember that they were tired. Jasper didn't speak for a long moment. You all right? He said finally. Yes. A beat. No. Maybe. That's honest. I promised you honesty. She turned away from the window. He wasn't just here about the engagement announcement. No, Jasper agreed. He wasn't. The two men with him. I recognized one of them. Name is Garrett. He does work for the Hearst family, the land acquisition side, not the social side. His voice was careful. The Hearsts have been looking at a parcel of land on the county's eastern edge for the better part of 2 years. The parcel they want is currently contested. Cora looked at him. Contested meaning legally complex, she asked. Or contested meaning someone else also wants it. Both, he said. The land in question belongs to the Darby family. As of this morning, our new survey shows the Northern Creek branch puts roughly 60 acres of that parcel inside Blackwell water rights. The Darby lease, the creek she'd flagged in the account meeting. If Blackwell has a claim on Darby water rights, she said slowly, then a Blackwell engagement to the wrong woman. A woman whose family had historical ties to the Eastern Fork could complicate any claim the Hearsts are trying to build. She felt the shape of it clicking into place like fence posts set in frozen ground. Pierce isn't here because of Eleanor's feelings. He's here because someone sent him. Jasper said nothing. That was its own answer. They used him, she said. The Hearsts sent him because they knew he had a personal angle, a reason to come that looked like concern instead of business. It's a reasonable play, Jasper said. If I were them, I'd have done the same thing. She stared at him. You would. Understanding a move isn't the same as endorsing it. He met her eyes. This is what land business looks like, Miss Mallory. It rarely looks like what it is. She thought about her father, about the way he'd always believed, right up until the end, that if you were straightforward and hardworking and honest in your dealings, the world would respond in kind. She thought about how wrong he had been, not because he was foolish, but because he had been too decent to see the machinery running beneath the surface of things. My father never played this kind of game, she said. I know. Jasper's voice was not unkind. That's part of what happened to his ranch. It hit her like cold water, the truth of it, the unfairness of it, the way those two things coexisted without canceling each other out. She stood with it for a moment, because it deserved a moment. Teach me, she said. Jasper looked at her. The machinery, she said. The land business, the water rights, the way people move against each other without looking like they're moving. Teach me how it actually works." She held his gaze. "I am not going to be the person in the room who doesn't understand what's happening. Not anymore. Never again." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might say no. Then, "Thursday meeting. Come early. We'll start with the county land records." It wasn't a warm answer. It wasn't effusive or reassuring. It was a door opening, and she walked through it. The days that followed had a different quality than the first week had. The first week, she'd been finding her footing, learning the rhythms of the house, the morning routines, who reported to whom, which of the ranch hands were reliable, and which needed watching, which conversations happened at the table, and which happened in doorways, and mattered more for that reason. She'd been observing. Now she was working. Jasper was not an easy teacher. He didn't explain things twice. He didn't soften the complicated parts or shield her from the uglier pieces of how land and money and power moved between families in Wyoming. He handed her documents and said, "Read this," and she read them. And when she had questions, she asked them, and he answered without condescension and without excess. It was the most functional relationship she had ever had with another person, and she was not sure what to do with the fact that she valued it. May noticed. May noticed everything. It was one of her defining qualities, along with strong opinions about biscuit technique, and an absolute refusal to call anyone by a title she didn't think they'd earned. "You're in the account room 6 hours a day now," May said one morning, handing Cora a cup of coffee with the directness of a woman who has decided a conversation is happening, whether you want it or not. "I am," Cora agreed. "And he doesn't chase you out." "He doesn't." May studied her. May had a look she deployed in these moments, not suspicious exactly, more the expression of a woman running a careful internal calculation. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "What did you expect?" "Something softer." May refilled her own cup. "Girls who end up in the main house usually," she paused, chose her words, "usually get there a different way. They expect to be taken care of. You're in there trying to learn the books." "My father built his ranch from 50 acres, Cora said. "He always said the books were the ranch. You could have beautiful cattle and good grass and a house that looked fine, and if you didn't understand your books, you were living inside a fiction." May was quiet for a moment. "Your father sounds like a smart man." "He was." She held her cup. "He was also too trusting, and that cost him everything." May nodded slowly. It was the nod of someone who has seen that exact story play out more than once in more than one life. "Mr. Blackwell," May said carefully, "is not a trusting man." "I know. But he trusts what he can see." May held Cora's gaze. "He's been watching you for 2 weeks. You should know that." Cora said nothing. She drank her coffee. May went back to her biscuits, and the conversation was over as efficiently as it had begun, but it sat with Cora through the morning and into the afternoon in a way she didn't entirely want to examine. She was in the corridor outside the east wing that evening when she heard it raised voices from the direction of the front study, which was the room Jasper used for private business meetings, the room that was always closed. She stopped. She did not move toward the door, but the voices were loud enough that the corridor carried them. "Can't keep ignoring the Hargrove offer. They've been patient, but I'm not ignoring it. I'm managing it on my own timeline." Jasper's voice. "Your father won't—" "My father's health doesn't change my position on this." Still level, still controlled, but she could hear something underneath it now, a thinness like metal that's been bent near its limit. "The Hargrove family wants an alliance. Fine. When I choose a wife, I'll choose for the benefit of this ranch and no other reason. That has always been the position." A pause. "People are saying the Mallory girl is—" "People," Jasper said with a quiet that was somehow louder than anything else he'd said, "can say what they like. That is not a factor I am currently weighing." She moved away from the corridor before she could hear more. She went upstairs and stood at her window and looked at the mountains going dark against the sky, and thought about what May had said he trusts. What he can see and what Jasper had said, that is not a factor I am currently weighing, and the space between those two things felt in this moment very large. She was a factor. That was what his silence had made clear. She was in the equation. How she was weighted, that was the part she didn't know. She was still thinking about it the next morning when Cal came to find her in the kitchen with his hat in his hands and the particular expression she'd learned to read as something has happened, and I am not sure how bad it is. There's a man at the south gate, Cal said, asking for you. For me. She set down her cup. Who? Won't give his name. Says he has a message from someone in town. Cal's voice was careful. He's one of the men who was with Vancewood Miss Mallory. I recognize the face. She went cold. Where's Mr. Blackwell? North pasture, 30 minutes out. 30 minutes. She thought about waiting. She thought about what Jasper had said they will have a response, and I intend to find out about it before they can act. She thought about how she was done being the person in the room who didn't understand what was happening. I'll go to the gate, she said. Cal looked like he wanted to argue. He was a practical man who had adjusted as Jasper had predicted to her presence in the account meetings and at the table and in places women on working ranches were not traditionally found. But he was also a man who had spent 30 years watching the Blackwell land and everyone on it, and something about this was making his jaw tight. I'll come with you, he said. It was not a question. Fine, she said. They walked to the south gate together, and the man waiting there was indeed the one she'd noticed shifting his weight in the sitting room when Pierce had come medium height, forgettable face, the quality of stillness that belongs to men paid to wait. He was holding a folded piece of paper. Miss Mallory, he said, I'm told you have a message. He held out the paper. She took it. She opened it. The handwriting was not Pierce's. She didn't recognize it. The message was 5 lines. You are sitting in a house built on ground that was taken not earned. Ask Blackwell what happened to the Delacroix property in 1887. Ask him whose water rights were reassigned after the flood of 1889. Ask him how many families lost land in this county so that the Blackwell fence line could grow another mile. Then ask yourself if the ring on your finger means what you think it means. She read it twice. She kept her face still with the effort of a woman who has learned in the past month what it costs to let people read your face. She folded the paper. She looked at the man who delivered it. Who sent this? She said. I'm not at liberty to say. Was it Pierce Vancewood? A pause that answered without answering. Tell whoever sent it, she said, that I received the message. She held the folded paper at her side. And tell them that if they have a question for me, they should have the decency to ask it themselves with their name attached. She turned and walked back toward the ranch house, and Cal fell into step beside her, and neither of them spoke. She went directly to the account room. She pulled the oldest ledgers from the shelf, the ones going back to the 1880s, the ones with cracked spines and ink that had faded to a brownish gray, and she started reading. She was on the 3rd ledger when Jasper came in. He was still in his work clothes from the north pasture, dusty and direct, and he stopped when he saw her at the desk, surrounded by old records, and something moved in his eyes that she couldn't name. Cal told me what happened at the gate, he said. Sit down, she said. He sat. She had never told him to sit before. He sat without comment, which told her something. She set the note on the desk between them. He read it. She watched him read it, watched his face, which gave almost nothing, but not quite nothing. She had learned the almost nothings. Delacroix, she said. 1887. I found a record of a property transfer. 2,200 acres on the western ridge. Sold to a Blackwell Holdings concern for 12 cents on the dollar. A family named Delacroix who had been on that land for 15 years. There's no explanation in this ledger for why they sold at that price. She held his gaze. Your father's records, I assume. Jasper set the note down. Yes, he said. One word, no decoration. What happened to the Delacroix family? She asked. A pause. The kind that isn't about finding words, but about deciding how many to use. They had a water dispute with my father. The details were contested. My father's version was that the water rights had always been Blackwell land. Their version was different. He looked at her directly. I was 11 years old in 1887. I did not make decisions. But you know what happened. I know my father's version. I know what the records show. I know that the Delacroix family left Wyoming the following spring, and I don't know where they went. His jaw was tight. She could see the muscle in it. I have tried since taking over management of this ranch to run it differently than my father did. Tried? She said. Is an honest word? He said. Yes. She sat with that. She looked at the note. She looked at the ring on her finger. This was sent to frighten me, she said. Or to turn me against you. Most likely. The person who sent it knew something real, something true, and used it as a weapon. She looked at him. That's the move, isn't it? That's what you meant when you said, land business rarely looks like what it is. You use the true things. The true things are the sharpest. Jasper was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. It wasn't the watching expression, the measuring one. It was something more open. More, she thought, like recognition. Yes, he said quietly. That's exactly what it is. So who actually sent it? Not Pierce, he said. Pierce doesn't know enough about the 1887 records to use them. Someone with access to county history. Someone who has been building a case against Blackwell land claims for long enough to know where to dig. He picked up the note. The Hearst family has a lawyer in Cheyenne named Marlowe. He's been in county records every other week for the past year. They're building a competing claim, Cora said, against the Darby parcel, against the water rights, against... She stopped. A thought arrived with the force of something dropped from a height. Against anything that a Blackwell could claim in court. They're building a preemptive case. She looked up. And if they can discredit you, your family's methods, the way your father acquired land, they undermine your standing before you ever get to court. Now you understand, he said, why the engagement announcement was not from a business perspective an entirely unwelcome development. She stared at him. A Blackwell with a legitimate partner, a woman from a ranching family with her own historical ties to the Eastern Forkland with no prior connection to the Hearst interests, is a harder target than a Blackwell alone. He said it without apology, which she was beginning to understand was how he said everything. It adds complexity to their case. You knew all of this, she said. The morning after the ball, when you sat across from me at the kitchen table. I suspected most of it. He held her gaze. I told you I intended to find out what Vancewood was planning before he could act. I also told you this arrangement could be managed well or badly. You didn't tell me I was a chess piece, she said. Her voice was flat. No. He didn't look away. I didn't, because you aren't. A beat. A chess piece doesn't find the Darby water rights issue. A chess piece doesn't read 40-year-old ledgers the afternoon she receives an anonymous note. A chess piece, he said with a quality in his voice she'd never heard from him before, something that was not quite warmth, but was in the same country, does not tell Pierce Vancewood to his face that she's done with him and mean every syllable. The room was very quiet. I need to know, she said, that you're not using me. I'm not, he said. I am working beside you. Those are different things. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the kitchen table and the account meetings and May's biscuits and Cal at the gate and the note on the desk between them with its true and weaponized facts and her father's hands and Pierce's easy dismissal and 6 months of marble floors. She picked up the oldest ledger. Then tell me everything your father did, she said. All of it. Every land transfer, every water rights dispute, every deal that doesn't look clean in these records. If someone is building a case against this ranch, I want to know it better than they do. Jasper reached across the desk and pulled the ledger toward him, opened it to the first disputed entry, and began to talk. They were still there when May knocked on the door at 8 in the evening with 2 plates of food, set them down without comment, and left. Neither of them noticed they'd missed supper until they saw the plates. Jasper looked at the plates, looked at her. Something moved in his eyes, that recognition she'd seen earlier, but warmer now or less guarded, which in this man amounted to the same thing. "You should eat," he said. "So should you," she said. They ate at the account desk with the old ledgers spread between them, and outside, Wyoming had gone full dark, and the ranch breathed and creaked around them, and Cora Mallory thought, this is what it feels like to be inside something real. Not safe. Real was not the same as safe, but real, after so long, was enough. 3 days after the night in the account room, a letter arrived from Edmund Blackwell. Cora knew it was significant before she knew what it said. She knew because Jasper read it at the breakfast table, something he never did with correspondence. He was a man who kept business and meals in separate rooms of his life, and because when he set it down, his face had the quality she had learned to read as controlled rather than calm. The controlled face was the one that meant something was happening underneath. Cal was at the table. He looked at the letter and looked at Jasper and found something very interesting to study in his coffee cup. "My father is coming," Jasper said. Nobody spoke. "Next week. He wants to meet—" A pause, exactly 1 beat, the woman his son is engaged to. Cora set down her fork. She kept her hands still on the table. "How much does he know? Enough to have opinions about it." Jasper folded the letter. "He knows your name. He knew your father. He will have looked into what happened to the double M. He looked at her directly. He will have questions. About whether I'm suitable. About whether this is real." The word landed between them on the table and sat there. Real. The word they had been carefully, professionally, mutually avoiding for 3 weeks while they worked beside each other in the account room and ate at the same table and built something that looked from the outside like an engagement and felt from the inside like she didn't have a word for what it felt like from the inside. She had stopped trying to find one. "Then we need to make it look real," she said. "It needs to be more than looking," he said. "My father spent 40 years reading people for profit. He will know a performance inside of 30 seconds. Cal stood up, announced he had fencing to check, and left with the efficient tact of a man who understood that some conversations required fewer witnesses. Cora looked at Jasper. Jasper looked at her. "Then it needs to be something more than a performance," she said. He said nothing. That was, she had learned, different from disagreement. "Tell me about him," she said. "Your father. What does he respect?" "Directness, preparation. People who understand that this land has a cost and don't pretend otherwise." He considered. "He has no patience for softness. Not cruelty, he isn't cruel, but softness. People who want things without wanting to work for them." "He sounds," she said carefully, "like he might have been difficult to grow up with." Jasper picked up his coffee cup. "He was not easy," he said, which was the most personal thing he had said to her in 3 weeks, and they both noted it and neither drew attention to it, and the conversation moved on, because that was how they operated, and it worked. "When he asks about us," she said, "what do we tell him?" "The truth," Jasper said. "As much of it as possible. The truth is harder to pull apart than a story. The truth is that I kissed you in a ballroom for revenge, and you decided to use it strategically, and I've been learning your account books ever since." "The truth," he said with that ghost of a not-quite smile, "is that we understand each other. In this county, in this business, that is rarer than love and worth more." She sat with that. She thought about whether it was a cynical thing to say or an honest one, and concluded it was both, which was the most Jasper answer possible. "All right," she said. "Then we tell him that." Edmund Blackwell arrived on a Thursday, which meant Cora met him on an account meeting day, which meant she had the ledgers open in front of her when he walked into the room. She had not planned it that way. She had genuinely forgotten, in the managed chaos of the morning, the extra preparations May had undertaken with the focused intensity of a woman going to war. The particular tension that had moved through the house like a weather system since Jasper told the staff that the account meeting was Thursday, and Edmund Blackwell was coming Thursday, and those two facts would intersect. But there she was with Aldous across from her and a spreadsheet of winter feed projections on the desk when the door opened and Jasper said, "Father, you're earlier than I expected." Edmund Blackwell was not what she'd pictured. She had built him from Jasper had expected something harder, sharper, more obviously formidable. What she got was a man in his late 60s, with a body that had once been powerful and still carried the memory of it, and eyes that were the same dark, watchful quality as his son's, and a stillness that was different from Jasper's stillness. Jasper was still the way a man is still when he's chosen it. Edmund was still the way stone is still. It wasn't a choice. It was a constitution. He looked at her, not at Jasper. At her, first. "Miss Mallory," he said. "Mr. Blackwell." She stood. She did not extend her hand, she waited because this was his house in every way that mattered, and she had been raised to understand the architecture of respect, even when it cost her something. "I apologize for the state of the room. We're mid-meeting." He looked at the ledgers. He looked at Aldous, who had the expression of a man who has made his peace with surprising developments. He looked back at her. "What are you working on?" he said. "Winter feed projections against last year's yield numbers," she said. "And a question about the North Pasture irrigation that I think is going to require pulling records from 91 and 92 to get a proper baseline." Edmund was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out the nearest chair and sat down. "Show me," he said. Jasper in the doorway went very still. Aldous made a sound that might have been a cough. Cora turned the projection sheet to face Edmund Blackwell and began to explain. He asked 7 questions in the following 20 minutes. Every single question was good, the kind of question that goes to the structural weakness of an argument rather than the surface of it. She answered 6 of them directly and told him honestly on the 7th that she didn't know and that she'd been planning to pull the 91 records to find out. He nodded. "Your father kept good books," he said. "Thomas Mallory." "He believed the books were the ranch," she said. "He was right." Edmund looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. Not warm warmth seemed like a thing that lived far from Edmund Blackwell's face, but not hostile. Something that might with time become respect. He was also too soft on water rights. Cost him the Eastern Creek access in the dry year. "I know," she said. "I think it cost him more than the water. I think it was the beginning of everything coming apart." Edmund looked at her for a long measuring moment. Then he looked at Jasper, who was still in the doorway, and something passed between father and son that she was not meant to read, but read anyway, a question asked without words, and an answer given the same way. "I'd like to speak to Miss Mallory alone," Edmund said. Jasper's jaw tightened. "Father?" "It's all right," Cora said. She looked at Jasper steadily until he believed her. He left. Aldous left. The door closed, and she was alone with Edmund Blackwell and the ledgers between them and 30 years of Blackwell history that she had been reading in secret for 3 weeks. "He hasn't been engaged before," Edmund said. "I know. He has also never brought a woman into the account meetings." He folded his hands on the table. "In 40 years of managing this ranch, I brought my wife into the account room twice. She had no interest in it. Most women of good family don't." "My father didn't have a son," she said, "so I'm not most women of good family." He looked at her. "You were a servant in this house 3 weeks ago." "I was," she said, without flinching, without apology. "Does that bother you?" "Less than you might expect," she said. It was humbling. "I learned things about this house and these people I wouldn't have learned any other way." She held his gaze. "It also made me very clear on what I want and what I'm capable of. Humility and clarity aren't the worst combination." Edmund was silent for what felt like a full minute. "The engagement announcement was impulsive," he said. "Entirely. My son is not an impulsive man." "No, he isn't. I'm the impulsive one. He's the one who turned it into something functional." She paused. "That's probably not what you expected me to say." "No," Edmund agreed. "It isn't." Another pause. "What do you want from this family, Miss Mallory?" She didn't hesitate. To earn my place here, not to be given it, not to be managed into it, to earn it. She looked at the ledgers. I grew up watching my father build something. I watched it come apart. I would like to build something again with my own hands and have it stand. She looked back at Edmund. Your son is a man I can build something with. That's rarer than I knew before I lost everything. The silence this time was different from the others. Less like waiting, more like something settling. The Hearst family, Edmund said, is going to come at this ranch hard in the spring. You know that. I'm beginning to understand it. They have lawyers and money and a county commissioner who owes them a favor. His voice was completely flat. What they don't have is someone who knows the Darby water rights issue from the inside. She looked at him sharply. You know about the Darby lease. I know about everything that happens on this land, he said. I may not run it anymore, but I pay attention. He looked at her with those dark, watchful eyes. You found that issue in your first account meeting. Aldous had been managing those accounts for 8 years, she said carefully. Aldous is precise and loyal and not creative, Edmund said. Those are mostly virtues. In this particular case, they were a liability. He stood, and she stood with him, and he was taller than she'd registered from a distance, and the authority he carried was the kind that didn't require demonstration. I am going to tell you something, Miss Mallory, and I want you to hear it clearly. Yes, sir. I was not a good man in my younger years on this land, he said. I made acquisitions that I am not proud of. I moved against families that did not deserve it. The Delacroix situation is one I have carried for a long time. He said it without melodrama, without seeking her absolution. He said it the way Jasper said difficult things directly, because the alternative was cowardice. I cannot undo those things. What I can do is make sure the next generation of this family does not build on the same foundations. Jasper has been trying to do that since he took over. He needs someone beside him who understands both the history and the direction. He moved toward the door. Mr. Blackwell, she said. He stopped. The Delacroix family, she said. Do you know where they went? He turned. The expression on his face was one she didn't expect from him, not comfortable, not controlled. Something older and harder to carry. Kansas, he said. There were 2 sons. If they had children, they'd be grown now. He left. She stood alone in the account room and breathed. The attack came 4 days later. She had gone out in the early afternoon to speak to the hand who managed the East Pasture fence line, a direct conversation not filtered through Cal or Jasper, because she had been doing more of that lately, learning the ranch through the people who ran it at ground level, and Jasper had noticed and said nothing about it, which she'd taken as approval. She was on the road between the east barn and the main gate when the horse came out of nowhere. Not an accident. She knew it immediately, the way you know the difference between a startled animal and a directed one. It came hard and fast from the tree line, and the rider was low and faceless under a pulled-down hat, and she had exactly 2 seconds to realize what was happening before she dove sideways off the path and hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath clean out of her body. She heard hoofbeats. She heard shouting from somewhere behind her. She lay on the cold ground with the air gone from her lungs and stared up at the Wyoming sky and thought with remarkable clarity, this is the response. This is what Jasper said would come. Then Jasper was there. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of him running, which was something she'd never heard before, because Jasper Blackwell did not run. Jasper Blackwell moved with the controlled economy of a man who never wasted motion, and the sound of him running toward her said something she wasn't ready to hear yet. He dropped to one knee beside her. His hands were on her before she could speak. Not her hands, her face, her shoulders checking with a rapid, focused efficiency that was also, she realized, personal. Not clinical. Personal. Are you hurt? His voice was different. The control was there, but the texture of it had changed. Winded, she managed. I'm all right. I'm all. He got an arm under her and helped her sit up. She let him. She was not a woman who let people help her easily, and she let him, and neither of them said anything about it. "Did you see the rider?" he said. No face. Deliberate. She caught her breath fully finally. It wasn't random. "No," he said, and the flatness in that word was the kind that lives just next to fury. It wasn't. Cal arrived 30 seconds later with 2 ranch hands, both of whom looked at the scene with expressions that understood immediately what it was. Jasper stood. He was holding her arm, still holding her arm, and she felt him make the decision to release it before he actually did, felt the deliberateness of it, and filed it away in the part of her mind that was always even now observing. "I want the tree line checked," Jasper said to Cal. "Both sides of the East Road. And I want to know who's been on our property in the last 48 hours. "Already on it," Cal said. Jasper looked at her. "Can you walk?" "I could run if necessary," she said, which was an exaggeration, but not by much. Something moved in his face. "Come inside." Inside, May took one look at her and began producing tea and opinions in equal measure. And Jasper stood at the window with his back to the room, and the quality of his stillness was not the controlled kind. It was the held kind. The kind where you are keeping something contained by sheer will. "Jasper," she said. He turned. "This escalates everything," she said. "They're not just maneuvering legally anymore." "No. Which means they're afraid of something." She looked at him. "What did we find that scared them enough to do this?" He crossed to the desk in the corner of the room. This was the private sitting room attached to the main study. A room she'd been in only twice before, and he pulled open the lower drawer and took out a document she hadn't seen before. He set it on the table between them. "The original 1887 Delacroix survey," he said. She looked at it. She looked at him. "Where did you get this?" "My father gave it to me the night before he left," he said. "He's had it for 40 years. He sat down across from her. "The survey shows the original boundary of the Delacroix property. If you overlay it against the current Darby lease and the Hearst claim, which I did 2 nights ago, the Hearst claim is built partially on land that was never legally transferred from Delacroix to Blackwell in the first place." She stared at him. "Your father's 1887 acquisition was not entirely clean," he said. "I told you that. What I didn't know until 2 days ago was that there is a specific parcel 63 acres on the western ridge that appears in the Delacroix survey but not in any subsequent Blackwell deed. It was never formally transferred. It has been in legal limbo for 40 years. And the Hearst claim overlaps that parcel by approximately 40 acres. She sat back. "If that parcel was never legally Blackwell land," she said slowly, "then it was never legally Hearst land either. And if the Delacroix heirs can be found, then the entire Hearst claim falls apart," he said. "Not just weakens, falls." She thought about Kansas. 2 sons. If they had children, they'd be grown now. She looked at Jasper. He was watching her with the full intensity of the thing he'd been carrying for the past 2 days, and she understood now what it weighed. "Your father gave you this," she said. "Yes." "He could have destroyed it, 40 years ago and again now. He chose not to." "Yes. That's—" She searched for the word. "That's not nothing." "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." The fire was going. Outside the day was going gray. She thought about the road and the horse and the 2 seconds in which she'd understood what was happening and made the choice to move. She thought about what it meant that she'd been targeted, not Jasper, not Cal, her. What it meant that they'd decided she was the vulnerability. "They think if they frighten me off, you lose whatever advantage the engagement creates," she said. "That's my read." "They underestimated something." "What's that?" She looked at him across the table. "I have already lost everything once," she said. "There is nothing they can take from me that I haven't already survived losing. That's not courage, it's just arithmetic. I have less to lose than they think." Jasper looked at her for a long moment, and the expression on his face was the most open she had ever seen it. Not the ghost of a smile, not the controlled watchfulness. Something that was quieter than either and went deeper. "Cora," he said. It was the first time he'd used her name without the miss. She felt it. She didn't show it. "Yes," she said. "I need to tell you something." He set his hands flat on the table, the same gesture he'd used the morning after the ball. She realized the gesture of a man establishing that what he's about to say is direct and without strategy. "This arrangement, the way it started, I want you to know that what it has become is not what I planned. I planned a strategic convenience. I did not plan—" He stopped, found the words. "I did not plan to find someone I can think beside." The fire crackled. May's footsteps moved in the kitchen beyond the wall. "Think beside," she repeated, without performing, without managing, without the— He paused, and she watched him search. Which was rare. Jasper was not a man who searched for words, the exhaustion of being the only one who sees the full picture of a thing. She looked at her hands. The ring? Simple gold small stone firelight. She had put it on in the kitchen 3 weeks ago, thinking it was a prop, and worn it long enough that she'd stopped thinking of it as anything. "I grew up," she said, "watching my father run a ranch by himself, and it killed him. Not the drought, not the debt, the aloneness of it. He didn't have someone to think beside." "I know," he said. "I used to think what I wanted was to be taken care of. That's what I thought Pierce was." She looked up. "I understand now that what I actually want is to be useful, to have work that matters, and someone to do it with who doesn't require me to be less than I am." "I don't require that," he said, simply, without embellishment. "I know," she said. "That's the thing, Jasper. You don't." The silence between them had a different quality from the silences in the account room. Those were working silences, the pause between one thought and the next. This one was warmer than that, more careful. The kind of silence that knows it's standing on the edge of something. He didn't cross the edge, not yet. He stood because they were both people who understood that the right moment for a thing was as important as the thing itself, and the right moment for this was not now, not with the East Road threat unresolved and the Hearst situation building, and the Delacroix survey on the table between them. "We need to find the Delacroix heirs," he said. "Kansas," she said. "Your father said Kansas. 2 sons." "I'll send letters tomorrow. Send 2 sets. Different addresses, different approaches. If one gets intercepted, the other arrives." He nodded. "Good." He looked at her. "You should stay inside for the next few days, close to the house." "I'm not going to hide." "I'm not asking you to hide," he said. "I'm asking you to give me 3 days to find out who was on that road, and I'd prefer to do it without worrying about what's happening to you at the same time." He held her gaze. "That is not management. That is a request. From a man who needs his attention on the eastern tree line, not divided." She looked at him for a long moment. 3 days, she said. 3 days. She nodded. He moved toward the door. "Jasper." He stopped. "The first morning," she said, "in the kitchen. You said you'd find out what Pierce was planning before he could act." She watched his face. "Did you also know that morning that the Hearst situation was already in motion?" A pause. "I suspected it. And you still made the arrangement with me, knowing it might put me in the middle of it." He turned fully to face her. "Yes," he said, no qualification, no softening. "I did." She appreciated the honesty more than she would have appreciated comfort. "All right," she said. He left. She sat alone in the sitting room with the 1887 survey on the table, and the fire going, and the sound of the ranch breathing around her, and she thought about everything she'd lost, and everything she'd found, and the particular strange grace of a life that burns all the way down and leaves you in the ash with a cleaner understanding of what you actually want. She picked up the survey. She spread it on the table. She found a sheet of paper and began making notes, not for Jasper, not for the account meeting for herself, in her own hand, her own thinking. She wrote down every name from the Delacroix records she'd been reading for 3 weeks. Every connected family. Every land boundary that touched the disputed parcel. Every thread she could pull. She wrote until the fire needed tending, and she tended it herself, and went back to writing, and outside Wyoming went from gray to full dark, and the stars came out enormous and cold, and inside Blackwell Ranch, a woman who had come here as a servant 6 months ago sat at a private desk and built a legal case from the ground up, and felt for the first time in longer than she could name entirely and completely alive. The letter from Kansas arrived on a Tuesday, 11 days after Jasper sent it. Cora was in the account room when Cal brought it in, not to Jasper, to her, because in the 11 days since Jasper had sent the letters, she had become quietly and without formal announcement the person who managed the Delacroix correspondence. Jasper had handed it to her without discussion. She had taken it the same way. That was how they operated now. She opened it. The handwriting was careful and unpracticed, the kind that belongs to someone who learned to write as a tool rather than an art. The name at the bottom was Samuel Delacroix, son of Henri Delacroix, grandson of the man who had owned 63 acres on the western ridge of what was now Blackwell Land in 1887. She read it once fast and once slowly, and then she went to find Jasper. He was in the north pasture talking to 2 ranch hands about the fence line damage from the previous week's wind. She walked out to him without hesitating, because she had stopped hesitating about that kind of thing somewhere in the past 2 weeks, and when he saw her face, he said something brief to the hands and walked toward her. "The letter," he said. "Samuel Delacroix is alive. He's 51 years old. He's in Topeka, and he has a lawyer." She held it out. "He's been aware of the land situation for 3 years. Someone contacted him 3 years ago, he doesn't say who, and told him the Western Ridge parcel might still carry his family's name in the original survey." Jasper took the letter, read it. His jaw tightened on the second paragraph. "Someone got to him before us," he said. "Yes. The Hearsts. That's my read. They found him. They told him enough to make him interested, and then they stopped because a Delacroix heir making a direct claim complicates their acquisition too. They just needed him aware enough to be a problem for Blackwell without being organized enough to be a problem for them." Jasper looked up from the letter. "So they've been managing him, keeping him in a holding pattern, interested but not activated." She met his eyes. "Until now. Because we contacted him directly, he knows there's another party who wants this resolved. That changes his position." Jasper handed the letter back. "He says he has a lawyer. A Topeka lawyer, not a Wyoming lawyer, not someone who knows this county's land records." She folded the letter. "If we can get to him before the Hearsts understand what's happening, before they realize we've made direct contact, we can offer him something they can't." "Which is?" "The truth," she said. "The full truth. The 1887 survey, your father's acknowledgement, a real accounting of what happened to his grandfather's land. Not a legal maneuver, an honest reckoning." She watched his face. "And a fair settlement on the 63 acres. Not litigation. Resolution." He was quiet for a moment. The wind came across the north pasture, and she felt it, and neither of them moved. "That cost this ranch real money," he said. "I know, and it opens the door to questions about every other acquisition my father made in that period." "I know that too." She didn't look away. "It also makes the Hearst claim completely uninhabitable. If Samuel Delacroix settles directly with Blackwell, if the 63 acres are formally and honestly resolved, there is no disputed parcel for the Hearsts to build their case on. The foundation of their entire claim disappears." Jasper looked at the fence line, looked at her. "You want me to pay for my father's mistake," he said. "To fix it, not just strategically, actually fix it. I want you to do what you told me you've been trying to do since you took over this ranch," she said quietly. "Build it differently than he did. This is what that looks like when it costs something." The silence between them had the weight of a real decision in it. Not a managed one, not a convenient one. "Write to Samuel Delacroix," Jasper said. "Tell him we'd like to meet, offer travel expenses, and get Aldous to start calculating what a fair market settlement on 63 acres looked like in 1887 adjusted forward." He paused. "Use the honest number, not the low one." She nodded. Cora. He said her name the way he had in the sitting room without the miss, which was still every time something she felt in her chest before she could stop it. This was your idea. I want you in the room when we meet him. She looked at him steadily. I'll be there. She turned and walked back toward the house, and behind her she heard him say something to the ranch hands, and the ordinary sounds of the north pasture resumed, and she thought this is what it looks like. Not the romantic version, the real version. Two people making a hard choice together, and neither of them flinching. She wrote the letter to Samuel Delacroix that afternoon. She wrote 3 drafts and burned the first 2 because they were too careful, too legal, too managed. The third one was honest. She told him that the Blackwell family had found the original 1887 survey. She told him they believed his grandfather had not been treated fairly. She told him they wanted to meet and discuss a resolution that was real, not convenient. She signed it with her own name as well as Jasper's because she had started something impulsive in a ballroom 2 months ago, and she was going to see it all the way through with her name attached. She sealed it and gave it to the writer before she could second-guess herself. The Hearsts moved 3 days later. She found out from May, who found out from the woman who did the Hearst laundry, who had overheard a conversation she probably wasn't meant to hear. The Hearst family's lawyer, Marlowe, had filed a preliminary claim on the Western Ridge parcel with the county office. Not a full suit, not yet, but a formal notice of interest, the legal equivalent of planting a flag. It was a move designed to freeze the situation to prevent any transfer or resolution until a court could sort out competing claims. Cora read the notice. Cal had gotten a copy from the county clerk, who was not a Hearst ally, and felt the architecture of what they'd done snap into sharp focus. If the claim froze the land, Samuel Delacroix couldn't settle with Blackwell without going through the courts. And courts meant time. And time meant money. And money meant that a man in Topeka, with a Topeka lawyer, might eventually decide that a long legal fight wasn't worth what he'd get at the end. The Hearsts were trying to exhaust them. She brought the notice to Jasper at 4 in the afternoon, and watched him read it, and watched his face do the controlled thing. They filed before our letter could reach Delacroix, she said. Yes. Which means they know we contacted him. They have someone watching the county mail, he said. Not a question. Or someone in this house. She said it quietly, but directly because it needed to be said, and she was not going to soften it. Someone who knew we sent the letters. Jasper set the notice down. He looked at her with an expression that was complicated in a way she recognized as personal. The look of a man processing a betrayal that has a face he knows. Aldous calculated the settlement number, he said. Aldous knew we were writing to Delacroix, she said. He prepared the calculations. He knew the timeline. Aldous has been with this family for 8 years. I know. She held his gaze. I'm not saying he's disloyal. I'm saying he's precise and practical, and the Hearsts may have made him an offer that seemed to a precise and practical man like a way to avoid a conflict he didn't want to be in the middle of. Jasper was quiet for a long time. I'll speak to him, he said. Do it today, before he knows the filing has been seen. He stood. He was already moving. She had noticed that about him once a decision was made. The motion was immediate, no gap between resolution and action. It was the thing she admired most consistently about him, and she had stopped pretending she didn't admire it. She waited in the account room. 15 minutes, 20, 30. When Jasper came back, she knew from his face before he spoke. He didn't deny it, Jasper said. He stood in the doorway and his voice was completely level, but the levelness was costing him. He said he was approached 6 weeks ago. He said they told him the Blackwell family's legal position was going to destroy the ranch, and he believed it was his responsibility to manage the information flow. He stopped. He thought he was protecting the ranch by giving the Hearsts our timeline. He didn't understand what he was giving them. A pause. Or he understood and told himself a different story about it. I'm not sure which. She thought about Aldous, his small spectacles, his careful notes, the way he'd adjusted over the past weeks to her presence in the account meetings, slowly, genuinely, the adjustment of a man who was actually reconsidering rather than performing reconsideration. He wasn't a bad man. He was a frightened one who had made a calculation and gotten it entirely wrong. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "He's no longer in the account meetings." Jasper came into the room, sat down. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, not physically, but in the place behind the eyes where real tiredness lives. "Beyond that, I need to think." She let him think. She sat across from him and didn't fill the silence, because sometimes the most useful thing is to let a person be inside a difficult moment without handing them a way out of it too quickly. Her father had taught her that too, though he'd taught it by accident. By being a man she'd watched sit with hard things and come through them still himself. After a while, Jasper said, "The filing freezes our options." "For direct settlement, yes," she said. "But not for everything." He looked up. "Samuel Delacroix can still come to Wyoming," she said. "He can still meet with us. He can still see the original survey, hear the honest history, make his own decision about what resolution he wants." She leaned forward. "The filing freezes a legal transfer. It doesn't freeze a conversation. And if he walks into a courtroom having already spoken to us, having already heard the full truth from the people who hold the land he walks in, as someone who was treated with respect rather than maneuvered, judges notice that." Jasper looked at her for a moment. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Since I sealed the letter," she said. "You anticipated the filing." "I anticipated something like it." She held his gaze. "They've been building this for 3 years. They're not going to let a letter to Kansas go unanswered." He was quiet, and then he said with a directness that had no performance in it, "I don't know what I would be doing right now if you weren't in this room." She felt it. She let herself feel it fully for the first time, the full weight of what had been building between them since a kitchen table and a cup of coffee in the early morning, since account meetings and old ledgers, and a note on the sitting room desk since his hand at her back in a ballroom, and the way he'd run across the east yard when she was on the ground. "You'd be doing it alone," she said. "And it would be slower and harder, and you'd get there eventually because you're not a man who stops. But you'd be doing it alone." "Yes," he said. "I'm not going to let you do that," she said, simply, the way he said things. He looked at her with everything dropped, all the controlled stillness, all the professional watchfulness, all of it set down for a moment, and what was underneath it was something quieter and more real than any of it. "Cora," he said. "I know," she said, and because they were both people who understood timing, neither of them said more than that, not yet. But it was said, and they both knew it, and the account room felt different after it. Samuel Delacroix arrived on the second Friday of November. He was younger looking than 51, and older feeling, a man who had worked with his hands his whole life in a different state from the land his grandfather had lost, carrying the story of that loss the way families carry things they were never given the chance to put down. He came alone. His Topeka lawyer had advised him not to, and he had come alone anyway, which told Cora something about him that she respected immediately. She was in the front sitting room when Cal showed him in. Jasper was there. Edmund, who had come back from his ranch the day before without explanation and without being asked, was in the corner chair, and his presence said something to Samuel Delacroix that a legal document couldn't. Samuel looked around the room. He looked at Edmund. "You're the son," he said, "of the man who took our land." "I am," Edmund said. "Sit down." Samuel sat. He looked at Cora. "You're the one who wrote to me." "Yes," she said. "Both letters were mine. I wanted you to know that before we started." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not a Blackwell." "Not yet," she said. She felt Jasper's attention shift beside her without moving. "My name is Cora Mallory. My father was Thomas Mallory. He lost his ranch to drought and debt 4 years ago. I understand what it means to have land that your family built disappear." She held Samuel's gaze. "I am not going to tell you the Blackwells handled your grandfather fairly. They didn't. I'm going to show you what we found and tell you what we think is right and let you decide." She put the 1887 survey on the table. Samuel looked at it for a long time. He reached out and touched the edge of it, not picking it up, just touching it the way you touch something you've been told about your whole life and never expected to see. "My grandfather drew this," he said quietly. The room was completely still. "He surveyed it himself," Samuel said. "My father told me. He used to say Henri Delacroix put his hands on every corner of that land. He knew every rock of it." He looked up. His eyes were dry, but the quality in them was not. "And then it was gone. And we were in Kansas. And we never talked about it because there was nothing to say." Edmund spoke from this corner chair. "Mr. Delacroix, my father did not handle your grandfather fairly. I have known that for 40 years. I did not do enough about it. I am telling you that now because I am an old man, and I would like to have done one honest thing about it before I'm done." Samuel looked at him for a long time. "What are you offering?" he said. Jasper spoke then, and he laid out the settlement clearly, and without strategy, the fair market value of the 63 acres, calculated honestly, the formal acknowledgement in county records that the 1887 transfer had been irregular, a letter that Samuel could file wherever he chose, stating the Blackwell family's position on his grandfather's claim. No legal maneuvering, no conditions, a number, and an acknowledgement. Samuel was quiet for a full minute after Jasper finished. "The Hearst family contacted me 3 years ago," he said. "We know," Cora said. "They told me the land was worth filing on, that I had a real claim." He looked at his hands. "They didn't offer me anything. They just kept me aware. Kept me on the hook." He looked up. "I understood after your letter came what they were doing with me." "Yes," Cora said. "They were using my grandfather's loss as a legal tool." "Yes." He was quiet again. Then he said to the room in general, but specifically to Edmund, "My father died believing that land had just been taken and there was nothing to be done about it. He spent his whole life believing the world was a place where the strong just took and you couldn't do a thing." He paused. "I would like to be able to tell my children something different." Edmund stood. He was slow getting up the age of him the weight of the 40 years, but he stood. He crossed the room and he held out his hand to Samuel Delacroix, and it was not a business handshake. It was the other kind. The kind that means something. Samuel took it. The Hearst claim collapsed within 6 weeks. When Samuel Delacroix settled directly with Blackwell and the 63 acres were formally resolved in county records, the foundation the Hearsts had been building their case on simply ceased to exist. Marlowe withdrew the filing. The county commissioner who owed the Hearsts a favor found suddenly and conveniently that he was occupied with other matters. The whole elaborate construction, 3 years in the making, came down the way these things always come down, not with drama, but with the quiet anticlimax of a structure that has lost its reason to stand. Pierce Vancewood and Eleanor Hearst were married in December. Cora read the announcement in the county paper at the breakfast table and felt absolutely nothing, which was the most complete answer to a question she hadn't known she was still asking. Jasper watched her read it. She looked up and found him watching, and she said, "Nothing." And he nodded once, and they moved on to the account figures for the 4th quarter. Edmund left the week before Christmas. He shook Jasper's hand at the door, and then he looked at Cora and did something she hadn't expected from him. He put both hands on her shoulders briefly, the gesture of a man who is not demonstrative, offering the most he knows how to give. "Your father would be proud," he said. She managed not to cry until he was down the drive. Then she went to the kitchen and cried into her apron, while May pretended very professionally not to notice and made an unnecessary amount of noise with the pots. It was the night of the first real snow that Jasper proposed. Not in the ballroom, not with an audience, not with the county watching, or a strategic calculation behind it. In the kitchen, the same kitchen where they'd sat across from each other on the morning after the ball with the fire finding itself, and the kettle on, and 2 cups of coffee between them. She had come down late because she couldn't sleep. He was already there, which meant he couldn't sleep either, and they were 2 people who had been living in the same house for 3 months and knew each other's insomnia the way you know the rhythms of something you've stopped pretending is temporary. He made the coffee. She sat at the table. Outside, the snow was coming down silent and serious, and Wyoming. He set the cup in front of her and sat across from her and looked at her directly, with everything open. No controlled stillness, no watchfulness, just him. And she thought, there it is. That's what's been underneath it. "I would like to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know that the answer doesn't change anything about this ranch or your place in it. I need you to know that first." "I know it," she said. "Cora." Her name in his voice still every time. "I am not a man who says things he doesn't mean. You know that." "I know that. I have been thinking beside you for 3 months," he said. "I have watched you do things I didn't expect from anyone, let alone someone who came here carrying nothing. I have watched you find the Darby lease and read 40-year-old ledgers and walk out to the south gate when I wasn't there to go with you and write a letter to a man in Kansas that was so honest it made me reconsider what honest means." He held her gaze. "I have watched you become someone this ranch needs, and I have—" He stopped, chose the words. "I have noticed with increasing difficulty that what I feel is not professional regard." She was very still. "I'm asking," he said, "if you would consider making this real. Not the arrangement. Not the convenience. This." He reached across the table and set the ring she had taken it off 3 weeks ago, when it started to feel dishonest to wear something she wanted to be true back on the table between them. "If you want it, if you want this, on those terms and no others." She looked at the ring. She thought about the ballroom and the impulsive crossing of a floor on fire. She thought about the kitchen the next morning and every morning since. She thought about the account room and the East Road and the sitting room and Samuel Delacroix touching the edge of his grandfather's survey and Edmund's hands on her shoulders and Pierce's face reading the engagement announcement in the county paper all those weeks ago, and the particular quality of his expression, which had been the expression of a man who finally understood what he had discarded. She thought about her father's hands on the fence posts, her mother's voice in the summer dark, everything she had lost, and everything that loss had stripped away until what was left was just her, just Cora, without the land, or the name, or the green silk dress, just the woman underneath all of it, and whether that woman was someone worth choosing. She picked up the ring. She put it on. She bow. "Yes," she said. The same way she said everything now directly without performance with her whole name behind it. Jasper exhaled once, and it was the most human sound she had ever heard from him, and she found that she was smiling and couldn't have stopped if she tried. "You're smiling," he said, as if this was data he was carefully noting. "You exhaled," she said, "like you were actually worried." "I was," he said, which was the most honest thing he had said in 3 months of honest things. And she laughed a real laugh, the first one in longer than she could remember, the kind that comes from somewhere that's been quiet for too long and finally has something worth waking up for. He smiled back. Not the ghost of one, the real thing. She had only seen it twice before, and it was better every time. They were married in March when the Wyoming ground was beginning to remember that it knew how to grow things. No grand affair. May baked the cake. Cal cried, which he denied immediately and convincingly to anyone who asked. Edmund came from his ranch and sat in the front row and looked at his son with an expression that contained 40 years of complicated things and something that was underneath all of it, unmistakably pride. Samuel Delacroix sent a letter. In the years that followed, the ranch grew the way things grow when they're built on honest ground steadily with setbacks and seasons, and the kind of hard years that test whether what you've built is real. They had 2 children, a daughter first, who had Jasper's dark, watchful eyes, and Cora's talent for finding the question underneath the question, and a son 2 years later who was loud and curious, and seemed determined to know every person on the property by name before he could walk properly. Cora ran the account meetings, not as Jasper's wife who happened to be present, but as the person who ran the account meetings, whose name appeared beside his on the ranch's legal documents, whose read on a land dispute or a lease agreement was sought by neighboring families and occasionally by families as far as Cheyenne. She became known in that county for the same thing her father had been known for: honesty and precision, and also for something her father hadn't had, which was the ability to see the machinery beneath the surface of things and navigate it without becoming it. Ruby Fitch left the Blackwell household 2 years after the wedding and opened a small laundry business in town with money she'd saved. Cora found out and sent a letter of recommendation that got her the lease on the building. Ruby wrote back a note that was 6 words long. "Thank you. I didn't forget either." Cora kept that note in the top drawer of the account desk for the rest of her life. One evening years after the kitchen proposal and the March wedding and all the building that came after, she stood at the window of the account room while Jasper went through the season's final figures, and she thought about the woman who had dropped to her knees on a marble floor with bleeding hands, while the man she loved laughed at her from across the room. She thought about the moment something inside that woman had snapped the moment she had stood up and crossed a ballroom like the floor was on fire and grabbed the future with both hands. She had not known in that moment what she was doing. She had only known she was done with small, done with invisible, done with a life that fit itself around other people's comfort and called that love. Done with the version of herself that had been taught by grief and by loss and by one man's polite abandonment that she was nothing. She had never been nothing. She had been becoming slowly, painfully, through every humiliation and every loss and every cold morning, with a mop on a marble floor. She had been becoming someone that nothing in the world could make small again. Jasper looked up from his figures. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, fully, without the controlled distance, with the complete attention of a man who has decided that the most important thing in his line of sight is worth seeing clearly. "Come to bed," he said. "5 minutes," she said. He went back to his figures. She stayed at the window another moment, watching Wyoming go dark under a sky full of more stars than any one person deserves, and she felt the solid weight of everything she had built beneath her feet. Not given, not inherited, not arranged. Earned, chosen, real. She turned away from the window. She walked toward the life she had built with her whole name attached and her eyes wide open, and she did not look back.